You are tuned in to episode 17 of Turn Coffee into Clients podcast show, and I'm your podcast host, Bella Networking Guru, the networking expert and the networking speaker. Events and conferences hire me as their online keynote networking speaker. Guys, today celebrations are in order. And before I share the celebrations, I want to thank every single one of you for making this celebration come true. I have achieved 500 downloads. I received an email today from Buzzsprout, which I use as the podcast hosting provider. And I wanted to say a big thank you to everybody that has been tuning in to the Bella Networking podcast show, downloading and sharing. We are not yet at episode 20, so it feels a great honor that you have been listening and you have been enjoying the episode. Please feel free to get in touch with me because I'd love to hear your feedback. You can reach me via the website turncoffeeintoclients.com, or the best way, easiest and fastest way to reach me is via LinkedIn. Just searching Bella Rare World or Bella Networking Guru. I would love to hear from you, and if you have any questions about episodes or topics I should cover, or maybe you have some networking questions, especially as right now we are challenged with the lockdown restrictions with regards to actual physical face-to-face networking events, and it has been a big challenge and transitions for some SMEs who now are working online and attending Zoom online networking events.
Coming up next.
Guys, do stay to the ending of the podcast as I have a bonus for you. I have a returning podcast guest. Well, actually, he was the very first SME whom I interviewed on Bella Networking podcast. His name is Clayton Coke from PRMS Limited. And the reason I wanted to include him in this episode is I wanted to talk about podcasting and motivate you to start a podcast. And Clayton Coke is the host of the Cash Flow Show podcast, and he'll be sharing his journey starting a podcast. So do stay tuned to the ending of the podcast to enjoy. I wanted to include in today's podcast a little bit of a sharing about myself so that you can understand my background and why I have a love for networking as a keynote speaker and starting a podcast to grow your business.
Something wonderful for your ears and your mind.
I've been running my business for 12 years and I totally enjoy my business role as a networking keynote speaker. And to share, the branding of Bella Networking keeps it really simple. I am 100% a networking specialist. I've been really fortunate to have some high profile speaking engagement clients ranging from Houses of Parliament, the O2, Metro Bank, Santander Bank, NatWest, Barking Enterprise Centre, the O2, and also I am a university lecturer. I really enjoy my role as a lecturer specializing in the art of networking to improve your skills for entrepreneurship, or using the art of networking for job hunting to help students achieve their dream job. It's so enlightening and refreshing, helping young people because they are the future. And one of my greatest messages that I am so passionate to really educate students and young people is that networking is a necessary business development tool, a tool for personal branding, regardless of what industry you are studying. And most of all, many students and young people are really nervous with regards to networking, and they are uncomfortable with networking. And I always promote and share that networking is just a skill. And I always say a skill can be learned. Just remember when you were born, you were not born with the talent and skill to cook, to ride a bike. You had to learn. When I'm hired by event organizers, exhibitions, or conferences to deliver a keynote speaker engagement on networking for entrepreneurs and SME delegates, the core messages are again the same. To improve your skills in networking, you really have to understand it is a skill and it's a skill that can be learned. In the case of business owners, the underlining messages are how to implement networking to grow your business. When I engage with the audience, my style is really simple. I stick to 4 stages, starting with how to create smart, powerful networking goals, how to build an audience, mastering the art of conversation, and the final stage is how to turn coffee into clients. In other words, how can I follow up like a pro? And this was the inspiration to my podcast. I love to research and invest my own personal development time to find out what are SMEs and entrepreneurs struggling with. And this was the inspiration to the topic of why I started the Bella Networking podcast show. If you revisit episode 5, I shared an episode to why I started the Bella Networking podcast show over a Christmas period. The inspiration to the topic was actually around following up. Hence, the name of the show, Turn Coffee into Clients. And this came about because after my research, I found so many entrepreneurs and SMEs would make great efforts attending networking events, picking up their business card, eating the lovely canapes, drinking the lovely wine, juice, or whatever was on tap, networking, making all these great, wonderful connections, exchanging lots and lots of business cards to find the next day instant procrastination would set in, and it would be so difficult to find the time and get motivated to follow up. So that's why I came up with the branding Turn Coffee into Clients podcast show, to give my podcast show a little bit of a zest, a little bit of fun, and maybe not have that dreaded thought of, oh my gosh, I have to follow up. Oh my gosh, I'm so bad at following up. Or sometimes what tends to happen, and I've heard this from delegates and networkers that have told me, they would literally have all these business cards and a week would pass, 2 weeks passed, and they would feel guilty because the additional weeks had been added on. So they would just say to themselves, well, actually, it's been so long now, there's no point in me following up, and they would just abandon it. And you know, I totally understand that approach because we're only human, and it's so easy the next day after a networking event to be inundated with emails, then a telephone call in the morning. Then by the time you know it, it's the afternoon. So I totally understand.
Keep listening for the best advice, inspiration and call to action to get you on the road to where you want to be.
So, by creating the concept Turn Coffee into Clients and the podcast show, I really wanted to create a fun environment where let's just focus on the coffee. And, guys, it doesn't just have to be coffee, by the way, it can be tea, herbal tea. You can follow up with a glass of wine. It really does not matter as long as that follow up has been done. And during my keynote speaker engagement, I really share with delegates a simple step by step process of creating a bulletproof follow up strategy. Now, I know we're living in coronavirus life and things have changed. Take this opportunity to still enjoy virtual coffees and, you know, have fun with it. If you've met someone during online networking or a Zoom networking event, say to them, hey, I'd love to have a virtual coffee. What do you like? And this is actually a great way of mastering the art of conversation, because one of the things that a lot of business professionals tend to forget in networking is you can make it fun and creative. So I always say to networkers, if you feel nervous or you feel you are an introvert in networking, do you know what? Ask that question. What's your favorite coffee or tea? Because I would love to meet you for a virtual coffee. I'd like to share a secret with you, which I share with delegates during keynote networking engagements. This sentence is very powerful for your mind. Sometimes we underestimate the power of our mind. Think about this the next time you make a new connection on LinkedIn, you make a new connection by telephone or video online networking event. When you deliver that sentence, asking the delegate, what's your favorite coffee? Let's have that virtual coffee or tea next time you're free. It actually sends a signal to your mind, and it's a way of reinforcing your memory. But not just that, it actually motivates you and reduces your procrastination because you feel a little bit more inspired, especially the next day, or even if it's the next week, to remember to follow up with that new connection you've made, because you're going to feel more inspired and it's going to have that feeling of something to look forward to. Guys, do visit my LinkedIn profile searching Bella Networking Guru or Bella Rare World, because every day I do share a tip on how you can get motivated to follow up and turn coffee into clients. I also share tips on why you should start a podcast, as my podcast show, which is available on Apple, Spotify, SoundCloud, TuneIn, and all the major podcast providers, has really allowed me to create a platform to help business owners grow their business by improving their networking skills and online networking skills, especially during these difficult challenges we are facing with coronavirus.
Coming up.
Before I share the interview with Clayton Coke and we have a chat about his podcast show, I wanted to just give you a few bullet points why a podcast can grow your business. Firstly, a podcast is really great for SEO and it can increase your traffic to your website. A podcast is really great for demonstrating that you're a leading authority. So no matter what your business industry is, you are that expert and you have content around your business that can position you as that leading authority. The listening audience for a podcast is on the rise, and it's a great time right now for a podcast. Many businesses are on furlough, coming out of furlough. There are a lot of businesses now working from home. So the audience has almost doubled or tripled since the start of the coronavirus outbreak. And it's not just businesses now that are launching podcasts and taking advantages of this trend. You would have heard in episode 16, I shared information regarding Michelle Obama has now launched a podcast. So if you haven't launched a podcast now, I really recommend that you perhaps do some research and consider it as a great networking and marketing tool for your business. If you have any questions, then please get in touch with me, as I'd love to share my journey starting my podcast with you. So, without further ado, here is the bonus to today's episode. I would love to introduce my entrepreneurial podcast guest today, Clayton Coke from PRMS Limited, and he will share his journey starting a podcast show and openly sharing his mistakes and giving you tips that can save you time and money starting your own podcast show. So Clayton, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Clayton M. Coke. I'm the founder and managing director of a company called PRMS Limited, and we are a company that provides late management or late payment management services for business.
I've launched my podcast show, which has been a dream for 2020. It has been a project in itself.
Oh yes, I know your pain.
Oh God! So I definitely want to share your podcast show, which is the Cash Flow Show, available on many of the podcast channel, which you'll share just now. But if you can talk about why did you launch a podcast show, and what platforms is it on? Actually, if you just share that.
Well, let's go back. In terms of platforms, we can be found on Spotify, which is taken over as the main podcast host. We can find I'm a provider. We can be found on Apple. We can be found on Anchor, Breaker, you name it. As I said, as long as you type in the Cash Flow Show, at some point you will find a picture of my more attractive looking twin who's going to be the position, and that's where you'll find the Cash Flow Show.
Great, on all the major
podcast platforms. So going forward, why did we start?
Absolutely.
Well, the journey goes back actually about 2.5 years ago, and that's when I mooted it to yourself and to Lisa Newton, who was the first podcast, and you were the second person that I managed to twist their arm to get involved. What happened was this, is that I realized that this podcasting thing was something that I found quite interesting. I've always liked radio, and I've always liked things, and I listened to a lot of podcasts, but they were more visual podcasts on YouTube, so that's not a problem. And occasionally I'd listen to a podcast that was somebody had sent me on an internet site, etc. But the thing is, I think for me was, I realized that some people were saying using a podcast for marketing, but I didn't want it to be a marketing exercise where all I did was just to tell people late payments, debt, cash.
Come and buy me. And buy me.
That's
the wrong approach.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And that's not where I wanted to be. I wanted to be able to tell the stories of people who I thought were great people, who were entrepreneurs, who were excellent at what they were doing, and who were also in a position that they could basically add value to my audience.
Add value, that's the key word.
That's the key thing. So therefore, the whole point is, it was set up in such a way that effectively and PRMS, we're in the background.
Absolutely.
So it's not, it's the cash flow show. It's not all about Clayton M. Coke. It's not all about PRMS. It's about the guest. And it's about the guest. I've got an opinion. I've got an opinion about a lot of things. I've got an opinion about an opinion. However, what is most important is what can that guest bring to that particular party? What can they say that is going to make our audiences jump up and think, hey, I didn't know that. So, for example, we've had a private detective on.
Oh, good. So you're sharing the guest story as well. And what type of industries have you had, of guests?
Private detectives, solicitors, business coaches, finance people, actresses and producers. And I love the way you've mixed the clientele of the guests, that they're not all in finance. No.
So the cash flow flow show is not just about money, cash. No. You've really mixed it up. That's really great.
Because when you meet people, the first thing they say is, oh, yeah, it's all about cash flow.
Yes.
And I'm thinking, it is. And that's why it's called the cash flow show. It's not because we sit down there just looking at spreadsheets. That's not what it's like.
Discussing money. Because money is such a sensitive topic. Not everybody wants to discuss it. Correct. So I love the objective and the strategic side you have done with your podcast. What's been the biggest challenge launching the podcast? For me, this project has literally taken 2 to 3 months, and it has been painful somewhat. So what are some of your challenges?
The first challenge is that knowing how to present your podcast. That's the first thing.
And what do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is that...
Do you mean the show? Or?
Yeah, I mean, in the intro to the cash flow show, it actually says, this is a radio show disguised as a podcast.
Oh, that's a nice marketing twist.
So the whole point is, I would love to be able to play tunes in between that.
Yes.
I think it's going to be like, some 80s...
Radio 4.
more like 80s, 90s pirate radio playing R&B. That's what I really want to do. But the thing is that has too many copyright complications.
Oh, I understand.
I can't be playing, SWV and J
Beyonce.
and Beyonce or whatever the case may be. I'm paying,
cease and desist letter the next day.
Exactly.
I understand.
So that's... Ultimately, if somebody gave me that spot, hint, at the end of the day, that would be fantastic.
Got you.
But the reality of it is, I wanted it to be professional.
Yes.
I listened to some people's podcasts.
Yes.
And it was good because people say, oh, be authentic. But there are certain times you can get away with authenticity. And there are certain times when you think, no, this just sounds rubbish. And so my thing was, I'm into audio anyway, so I'm into music and making music. Yes. So it wasn't a big leap for me.
Got you.
But the problem is, for me, I wanted to do things in the proper way. When I first started, I thought, oh, where shall I put my podcast? I put it on SoundCloud. Now, the thing is...
I remember that.
That's right.
Because the link you gave me, I was promoting it via...
SoundCloud.
The SoundCloud link. And was SoundCloud maybe not the right podcast provider?
It wasn't really.
Oh, right.
No.
Why is that then?
SoundCloud is great for hosting audio, but it's not great to me as it can be one of many places that you can host your audio. But for me, it wasn't. It doesn't do what a podcast provider should do.
So what you have touched is important. There's a big difference listening to perhaps audio or music or interview like on SoundCloud. But if you're launching a podcast channel, you should be on providers such as Apple Podcast, or you mentioned Anchor. Should those be the more appropriate ones?
Probably so. I think the first thing that you need to have is what's called an RSS feed.
Got you.
And your RSS feed is your passport.
Yes.
It's like it will take you wherever you want to go around. So that's what you need. You need an RSS feed.
Yes.
But instead, all of this is stuff that you can Google.
Absolutely.
I would suggest if you've got no money or a limited amount of funds, or you want to start basically, Anchor's the place to start.
Great start.
And since Anchor was taken over by Spotify, that made it much easier. So, and Spotify now, as I said previously in the last segment of the show, is a situation where they are creeping past Apple, who are the originators,
So
effectively.
who's
of
the
the podcast.
number one now then?
Well, it
Is
depends.
it hard to say?
Well, let's put it this way: the latest statistics from what I've read is Spotify are just inching
Really?
ahead of Apple.
So I also saw when I did my research, and actually I'd like to ask you how long you took researching. I came across, everybody knows Apple, obviously, and then I saw Google Podcast.
Correct.
And I didn't get the feeling it was out there.
No.
What are your views on Google Podcasts as a provider?
Google Podcasts are really weird because they are very much attached to that model that they use for websites.
Oh.
So what Google Podcasts wouldn't do, it wouldn't really acknowledge you unless you had a website for your podcast.
And that's where you made a good point. When choosing the podcast provider, look at it as a podcast, so therefore go to those who are the leading technology, such as Spotify, are understood.
So that's what created that problem, because what Google Podcast was looking for was a web page.
Understood, because of the SEO and Google being first page, so you have to be associated with a website.
Correct.
Understood. So thank you for that tip. That's really important, because I know I was inspired to launch the podcast because of content I have for Turn Coffee into Clients and the hashtag Coffee with Bella Rare World campaign, but also listening to other podcast channels and hosts like yourself and seeing that it was becoming quite popular. So when you hear a podcast, you want to start it, but actually the process does take quite long. So another question I'd like to ask, you're 2.5 years being a podcast host, what will you be doing differently this year for 2020?
This year is all about streamlining the process. I think that I've come up with
automation.
Yeah, there are two words for 2020 for me: automation and delegation.
Right, delegation.
Yeah, automation and delegation, and we talk about delegation especially a lot on the Cash Flow Show. Because that's the only way you can grow your business. You cannot grow your business by doing everything yourself.
I am so glad you mentioned that. And this was one of the mistakes I made in my business, because I know I'm a perfectionist.
We've all done it.
And when you launch your business, because you're so passionate about what you do, because I'm passionate about networking, you can almost think you want to do everything yourself. And that's probably one of the biggest mistakes in business.
Correct.
And you have to allow your business to grow. And the only way you can allow it to grow, as you said, you have to master the art of delegation, so you're right.
You have to do
that. I
that.
agree. And how will you be doing that for your show this year?
Well, the thing is that it's all about processes. You found out in terms of what you've done. When I was winging everything. I was winging everything.
I'm still winging it.
but the reality of it is because I come from a legal background.
Yes.
So therefore, when you stand up in front of a judge, you need to have a rough idea of what you're going to say.
Absolutely.
There's only a limit to a certain time where a brother can style things out.
Absolutely.
Because you're under pressure, because you're a brother in there in the first place. So let's be realistic about this. So you've got to come with some kind of game at the beginning.
Absolutely.
So for me, I spent ages researching the questions.
Oh, I see.
spent ages creating a set of questions, then created a beginning, created an ending, created a trailer, created lots of these different things. So I was in a position where I've literally gone backwards to go forwards.
Absolutely.
Because I didn't have all of that information at the beginning.
Yes.
What I found myself is just in a situation of, no, I need to make this professional.
Yes.
And I then need to start to work with people in that way.
And you tweak as you go along.
Of course.
Because even maybe in the spring or summer, you'll still make tweaks.
Correct.
And that's what that's what I learned with my podcast. Where I normally can be a perfectionist, I would be so slow to launch it. But I said, you know what? Just get it out there and then tweak as you go along.
Yeah.
So that's really great. What I wanted to also ask, just before we end, to go on to discuss your networking activities, if you could just share one last tip with a viewer, if they're thinking about starting a podcast, maybe what's the one thing that they should consider?
If they're thinking about considering a podcast, I'm going to split it into two. The first practical thing that they can do is there are so many articles on the internet. Read. Absorb as much as you can. I've got masses of documents at the end of the day, that everything that I've sat down and read, and I've learned podcasting in a very, very short period of time as I've gone along, because at the end of the day, that's what you need to do.
Absolutely.
So read as much as possible, listen to people.
Because the information is out there.
Well, yeah, of course it is. I mean, but the thing is, I went to something called Pods Up North.
Okay.
Which was in Manchester.
A networking event.
Well, it was effectively a networking event for podcasters.
Really?
But that was in Manchester, which was really good. So shout out to people from Pods Up North. Who I'm sure will never forget me in a hurry. So that's one. But the other practical tip I would give is editing.
Allow time for
editing. Get yourself a good editor, because a good editor will make your stuff look good.
It's the finishing.
Yeah, it's
fantastic. And on that note, I think it is an excellent way to end the show. Guys, I really urge you to learn a bit more about Clayton Coke by visiting his website, prmslimited.co.uk. And do connect with him on LinkedIn, searching Clayton Coke, and mention that you heard his interview on Turn Coffee into Clients podcast show. And as always, for every podcast interview guest, their website links will be added to the podcast description box, where you'll also have a chance to listen to his podcast show, The Cash Flow Show. And guys, I just wanted to say I'm really grateful to all the listeners and followers who continuously listen to every episode of Turn Coffee into Clients podcast show, helping my podcast channel reach 500 downloads. As we move closer to episode 20 and beyond, I can't wait to share with you part 2 of International Networking Series, where I'll be taking you on a journey city to city, where you will learn how other business professionals from Portugal, Turkey, Germany, Guatemala, and much, much more have overcome entrepreneurial business challenges whilst in lockdown and did not let the outbreak of coronavirus stand in their way. Do remember to follow and subscribe and share with friends and colleagues in your network so that you can be alerted on this upcoming series where I take you from city to city without business travel. Guys, take care of yourselves, stay safe, and I look forward to seeing you next time.